Well, this is one of the more famous parables that Jesus tells. This is one of the more famous parts of all of Scripture. And I've heard it called a number of different things. The most common is the parable of the prodigal son, which I'm sure you've heard before. Others have called it the parable of the loving father. I've heard others say it's the parable of the unwise or foolish spender, the parable of the self-righteous brother. A number of titles. But I think it's a really good story because we can read it and we see the different characters in it. And it helps us to associate ourselves with where we might fit in to God's story. I think a lot of us read it and we recognize the times in our lives where we've been the younger son, where we've been the younger brother. The story of this character of the younger brother who embodies humanity, really. Embodies sin for us. He goes to his father and says, "Father, I'm tired of living the life that you want me to. I'm tired of living on your property. I'm tired of doing what you say. I just want whatever I've got coming to me, and I want to leave. I want to pretend as if you are dead, and I have my inheritance, and I'm gone, and I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to go where I want to go, and I want to be who I'm going to be, and it's going to be as if you don't even exist. Everything that you've taught me is unimportant. All I want is the money that I have coming to me," as if his father was nothing more than an ATM. And once the account was empty, he moved on. And so his father said, "Okay, that's what you want. Here you go." It's really the story of God saying, "I created you from nothing. I love you. You are mine. Come and live with me in this paradise." And Adam and Eve say, "Yeah, that's okay. We want to do what we want to do. We want to know what you know. We want to sin." And so they do. And so they go and they live their lives apart from God. And I think we might call this rebellion, where he goes and he squanders everything. And you got to give him credit. He doesn't squander and immediately come home. He squanders it and says, "Well, I'll just go get a job then," right? Because when you make a bad decision, you're not really ready to admit that it's a bad decision until you have no other options. So he hires himself out and starts feeding pigs. Well, there's a famine, and all of a sudden, he has nothing to eat, and he has hit rock bottom. And the rebellion has now become reality, and he sees that he has no other choice but to go home. Because life is better with his father than it is when he's by himself. I think we all come to that realization. That God creates us and calls us to live a certain way, and we say, "No thanks, I want to try it my own way." And then we come to the conclusion that, well, my own way is not really working. Maybe I should return to God. Maybe I should listen to what God has to say about living a life that is peaceful, living a life of loving my neighbor. Maybe that's a better way to live. And so he returns home, not knowing if his father is going to be there to welcome him, not knowing if his father is going to be there to love him again. But he returns home. And I love this vision of the text because it tells us so much about the father. That the father is sitting on a porch. And he's just looking down the road. And you wonder how often the father would sit there, and for how long he would sit there, and just look down the road for the day when his son might come walking back. Just sitting there, looking and waiting. And then, when he sees his son on the horizon, he gets up. You've got to imagine the guy's probably pretty old if he has two grown sons. And he just starts running to him. So excited to see him. He wraps his arms around him. Bring the best robe, bring a gold ring, bring the fatted calf. The poor fatted calf is the only one who truly doesn't enjoy the story. Let's throw a party. Let's celebrate, because my son, who was once dead, is now alive. Who once was lost is now found. But I think a lot of us, we might associate ourselves with the older brother a little bit more. I know I had a conversation with somebody about that today. The older brother, the one who sees the younger brother from a distance, the party going on, and says, you know what? I've been here the whole time. I haven't done anything wrong. It's not fair that he gets the party. I haven't even gotten a little goat, and he gets the fatted calf. The older brother who's furious at his father for showing such grace, for showing such love. He took half your inheritance and left as if you were dead. And since he's been gone, I've been running things myself while you sat on the porch drinking lemonade. You've got to imagine the older brother's pretty upset. This isn't fair. This isn't fair. You know, I think sometimes we meet people or we hear stories about things that people do, and we're not sure we want God's grace for them. We're not sure that we're ready to include them in our party, in the party that God is throwing that we're going to. I've been struggling this week with the young man in Euless who shot the police officer. I've been struggling to think about forgiving him, to think about how God is having a conversation with him, because as a police chaplain, that is just so scary, it's so evil, it's so real. And it's hard. And I can imagine the older brother saying, I want nothing to do with the party that welcomes him. But the more I read this parable, and the characters that are in it, the more I think, it's missing a character. It's missing a character. I don't feel like the younger brother, and although at times in my life I certainly have been, I don't feel like the older brother, although at times in my life it's happened. I've had that attitude. I feel like there's a character missing in the middle of the story, so I'm just going to add him. And I was trying to think what a righteous and holy name would be for this character, and I came up with the name Nick. So we're going to put Nick in the middle of the story. And you can name the character whatever you want. You can name him or her Susie or Josh or Jim or Sandy or Aaron or Mark or Karen, whatever you want to name this character. But it's not a good character. This character doesn't have an easy job. This character actually has to be the most difficult thing. This is the character that is sent by the father to find the younger son who is in the pig slop and say, come home. Your father is waiting. This is the character who is sent to bring the message of 2 Corinthians that we heard this morning. Come back to God. Be reconciled to God. Your father spends every day sitting on the porch waiting to see you again. You might think that he doesn't want to see you, but in reality, he can't wait. Nothing would bring him more joy than to see you walking down the street on your way home. It doesn't matter what you've done. Your father still wants to see you all the same. Your father still loves you all the same. And it doesn't matter what your brother thinks or what anybody else thinks. Just come home, because your father is ready to run and meet you and throw his arms around you and assure you that ever since you left, you have been loved and you have been missed, and everything that you have done is forgiven. Just come home. I think we all know a lot of people who need to hear that. And we get to live out this parable in our lives and in their lives. Will you join the parable with me? Amen.